You know, when I was a kid, I actually learned a lot out of just guitar books, like song books. I would learn Beatles songs or just whatever was kind of hip at the time. This is a long time ago, but I learned a lot of chords that way. I didn't really know what the chords meant all the time because at that point I just knew kind of simple cowboy chords. But you know, if I was doing a Beatles song and there was a diminished chord in there, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the symbol meant. I could just see a little diagram and put my fingers there and it sounded correct, so I just rolled with it. But of course, over time, you want to learn the symbols, because if you're just reading a chart, if there's no diagram there, and it just has the chord symbol written there, you're going to want to know like what's going on with that voicing. So basically, you know, I'm just going to start with a simple C chord. All these are just going to be some kind of C chord. And I want to just talk about what's the difference between a C add 9, a C6 chord, a C major 9, a C dominant 9. What's the difference between all these? Now, if you've been around the block a few times, this will be old news for you, but maybe this will help some of you folks out. So let's check it out. Okay, so I have a little diagram here with some chord symbols. I'm going to also just play these for you and explain, but we're going to just start with a simple, what I call cowboy C. Okay, just a good old-fashioned cowboy or open campfire chord, whatever you want to call that. And I'm not going to go into a million different voicings of all these chords because I'll be here all day. I just mostly want to explain, you know, what's happening when you see, you know, C sus4 on a chord chart and you're like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? So we can talk about it a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to give you two versions here. I've got a C and just an open chord, and then I have a C kind of bar chord. Now these are just triad chords, 3-note chords, about as simple as it gets. Okay, now you see the next one here is a C sus4, all right? Now what that means is a sus4 means that you're, you know, sus is short for suspending. So you're suspending the third. So if you look at this C chord, the second note of this C chord right here, this E note, is the major third. So the way you suspend it is you put the fourth in front of it, in this case F. All right, and that's, you know, if you put the fourth in there and kept the third, that would be a different chord, but because it has a sus4, that's telling you that it's actually going in front of the third. There's no third in this chord. It's just the C, the F is the fourth, G is the fifth, and then there's another C here. So now another version of that would be, so right here, here's just my regular bar chord, and with my pinky here, I put that F note on there, and that's suspending the third. It's going in front of the third, so that's a sus4. So that's all that means. Suspended just means there's no third in the chord. Now, a big confusion for a lot of folks is the add 9. What's the difference between, let's just say C9. Let's say you see C9 or C add 9 or C major 9. What's the difference? Well, an add 9 chord is just a triad chord with the 9th note added. Now, the 9th note is just the second note of the scale up, you know, an octave. So the second note of C is D. So we'll move it up an octave. Here's D here. So we play that C chord and we add that D. And that's been used many times over. Some people just play it like this, or maybe like this, depending on the situation. And there's another version of that. You could play it something like this. It's a little bit harder. All right, so here we just have our simple C bar chord, and we're going to add the 9, the D note here on the G string. That might be a little bit trickier to grab onto, but it's just an alternate voicing. Okay, the next one here that you see is C sus2. So you say, wait a minute, what's the difference between C sus4 and C sus2? Well, the sus means there's no third, but instead of the fourth being in front of the third or replacing the third, now the 2 is. Okay, so the second note, which would be D, you could find that here. So here's my C bar chord. Now I'm going to take this note, there's my major third E, I'm going to move it down here. And it's a little bit like these sus chords are a little ambiguous because they don't have thirds. They could be major, could be minor, depending on the situation. It really just kind of depends on how you resolve the chord. If you play something like this, then it's kind of got a minor connotation. But if you play something like that, then it has a major connotation. But on its own, it's technically neither or. Although to me, sonically, they are a little nicer sounding, so they sound probably better as a replacement for just this chord here, like your C major chord. A lot of times I'll play those C sus2 chords. Another version of that would potentially be here. So, and there's many different voicings of these chords with inversions and everything else, but I want to pay most attention to the names of them. That way, if you were reading a chord chart, maybe the diagrams weren't on here, you would know what to play. Now, some of these are just colorations, like the add 9. If I see the add 9 on a chord chart, and for whatever reason I'm not sure what to play, you could just play a C major chord and you should be fine. Same thing kind of with sus2 chords. If you're not sure what to play, you can always just play a C major chord, and usually that will work. Not always, but usually. I'm going to probably get roasted for some of this stuff. But you can see, okay, now we're going to traverse down here a little bit, and you say, okay, now I got C major 7. What's the difference between just C major or C and C major 7? Well, now a major 7th chord is a 4-note chord. So if we take that C chord and we add the 7th note of the scale, which would be B, now it's a 4-note chord, and that is called a major 7th chord. And another version of that would be something like this, drop 2, whatever you want to call them. Again, I'm not going to go too crazy with chord voicings, but I just want to show you the difference. So, if it says C major 7 as opposed to just C, then, you probably want to sneak that B note in there. You want to get that 7th in there, right? Because maybe the song calls for it, so to speak. Now, you'll see here, here's C major 9, and now it says no 5th because we only have limited fingers here on the guitar, so sometimes we have to make compromises, and usually the 5th is the first one to go. But the C major 9, now that's different. A C add 9 was just a C major triad chord with the 9th added, but now this is a C major 7th chord with the 9th added. But like I said, we only have so many fingers, so I can't quite, here's that C major 7th chord, that kind of open. Now if I take this C note here and I move it up to D, I have to reconfigure my hand here a little bit, but that's a C major 9. It's not a C add 9. A C add 9 doesn't have the 7th in it. So that's the difference I'm trying to get across to you guys. I'm not going to try to give you a ton of chord voicings. There's many resources for that out there on the web. But just so you know what's happening. Now, if you don't know any C major 9 voicings, but you know a C major 7, you'd probably be okay with that. All this is an extended C major 7th chord. Same thing with a C major 13 chord. Okay, so a major 13 chord, that's just a C major 7 with an A on top, because if you count up the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, it's A, right? So you can play that a couple different ways. You can add the 3rd in there. So sometimes I like to have the 9 and the 13 together. Something like that. But because it says major in the title, I know it's got to have that major 7th. All right. Now what if I just played this? Now this would be a C6 chord because there's no 7th. It's just a triad chord with the A on top. So that would be a C6 chord. So the difference is same note, right? but we call it something different. And if it just says C6, I know that it's doesn't have that 7th in there. All right, so like a C major 13, this voicing here we just did. Another one would be maybe something like this. Got the A on top. Here's just a stock C major 7th chord, and there's the A. To be honest with you, a lot of times if I'm playing these chords, if I'm playing in an ensemble, a band or something, and the bass player's covering that C note, I might just play this. You know, just you know, stay away from the root and kind of play the upper structure of the chord. Again, if I saw C major 13 on a chord chart and I didn't have any of those voicings together, I'd probably just play C major 7. Just kind of telling me that it's some form of a major 7th chord. Now with dominant chords, like a C7 chord, you might say C7, C9. You notice there's no major there, right? There's just a letter directly followed by a number. What that connotates is a dominant chord. Now dominant chords are major chords with a flat 7. So a flat 7 of C would be B flat. So I can find one of those on the 3rd fret of the G string here. So that's dramatically different than this, right? That's like a really nice sweet sounding chord. This is kind of bluesy and funky, and they have different functions too, so you don't want to get these mixed up. So anytime you have a letter followed directly by a number, it indicates it's some form of a dominant 7th chord. So here's just a couple different voicings. So you remember this one here, here's our C triad chord, then we made a C major 7th. Now if I pick this finger up, my middle finger here, the B goes to B flat, that's a flatted 7th. And there's your C7 chord. Use these a lot in blues and stuff like that. Okay, so now we have an extended version of that, which is a C9 chord. Again, you see though, they got C and then directly followed by a number C9. So all that is I take my C7 chord here, and I want to add the 9 to the chord, which is D, up on top, right? I think everybody's made these kind of chords before. But, you know, don't get it confused with C major 9, because that's a completely different sound and a completely different function. And, you know, there's many voicings of C9 chords around, but that's what, anytime you see that letter followed directly by a number. Here's another example, C13, okay? So if you take that C9 chord and add that A up on top, there's your 13, that A note. All right, that's one voicing. Another voicing is, here's kind of jazzy or bluesy. So it's just extending the C7 chord, adding a few extensions to it. Now you could take that dominant chord, here's C7, and then turn it into a sus4 by pushing the 3rd up a half step to the 4th. So here's a C7 chord, and right here my pinky's on that 3rd. Okay, so now the 4th is in front of the 3rd. You're not hearing the 3rd anymore. So technically, we don't know if it's major or minor yet. I do have a flat 7, so it could resolve to C7. It could potentially resolve to C minor 7. Whoops. Could, in most cases, a C7 sus4 is telling you that it's going to resolve to the C7 chord. Okay, and there's multiple shapes for that chord here. Okay, a C9 sus. Now this one could be called a few different things. What you'll notice is I'll play the chord here, and what I have is I kind of have that C9 chord, but then I have the sus4 here, and I have the 9 here, right? So some people will call that a C9 sus4. You could also think of it as a B flat chord with a C in the bass. here's a B flat triad with a C in the bass. So that might be written like B flat slash C, B flat over C. And I think in a lot of cases it is written like that. But I wanted to just give you another example of it. Okay, then we have some minor sounds, right? So, you know, a lot of folks know our major open chord, but when you go to make this C major a C minor, a lot of times we go right to this minor chord here. But you can play a minor chord by just lowering this note to that note. That's a major third to a minor third. Now you want to stay away from the high E string here because, well, the high E string is the major third, so you'd have both in there. Might sound a little funky. This is just a triad chord. Okay. So that's your just triad chord. Now C minor 7 just means that you have the flatted 7th in the chord. Okay, so the C minor 7th chord, it just means that you're going to have the flat 7 in the chord, so it's a 4-note chord. So again, if you just saw C minor 7 and you didn't know any voicings for it, you could just play C minor. But the way to get, a simple way to get the voicing is just pick up your pinky from the C minor chord and you get a C minor 7. It's a little jazzier, doesn't apply for all styles of music. Sometimes it's just a good old-fashioned C minor chord is the way to go. It's got a little bit more air to it. Here's just a basic C minor, like an E-shaped C minor, but C minor 7, got to get that B flat note in there. Okay, so a C minor 11. Okay, so basically what we're going to want is to add that 4th note of there, but the 3rd is also in there too. Now, this doesn't sound as bad as it does against a major 3rd because the distance is... I happen to like that a lot. Some people don't like that half step thing, but in this case it's a whole step, so I think it sounds really cool. I use these chords all the time. Now, it might be a little too dense for some styles of music, but I really like, I use these chords all the time. Another voicing would be here. So that's a C minor 11. And then you have a C minor, oh, I skipped one, C minor 9. This is one of my favorite chords too. Basically, you got to get that D in there, right? So you had your C dominant 9, which is a major chord because it has the major 3rd. If you just lower that major 3rd down to a minor, now you got a minor 9. And you know, again, there's all kinds of different ways to play these chords. I'm more concerned about, like, you know, if I was in the heat of the battle, let's say, for example, I was to go on to a gig and somebody just put a chord chart in front of me with the handwritten. They're not going to put diagrams of chords on there, right? So if there was some really fancy chord on there, I would just, and I didn't really quite have a readable, available voicing. Maybe I'm just reading as I go. I'm just going to look at what the core of the chord is first and make sure I cover that. So if it says something like C minor 11, and of course I know some voicings for that, but if I didn't, I could just play C minor or C minor 7. So just as long as you get the core of the chord correct, you're pretty much good to go for the most part. Now, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, depending on the style of music. For example, I did some gigs with a friend of mine's band that was kind of a gypsy jazz band. They play a lot of Spanish-influenced music, and I was learning some of their songs on nylon string, and I was looking at some of their charts, and the song would just say like E minor to B major, let's say, for example. So it'd be something like so I started playing those with 7th chords, like E minor 7, and then B7, and then C major 7, and then A minor 7. And it didn't have the right sound. I found that if I just played the triad chord, stylistically, it sounded better. So not everything is, you know, completely written in stone or whatever. You have to also think about the style of music that you're playing. There might also be some alternative, what do you call it, nomenclature, for lack of a better term, that you might see. There's multiple ways of saying C major 7. So I'm going to jump over to the whiteboard, or dark board, because it's actually dark, and I'm just going to give you some examples. But you know, I just want to remind you guys that I do have a Patreon site, and of course, you know, your support is much appreciated. So anytime I do videos like this for YouTube, if there's a PDF included or anything like that, I put that on my Patreon, just tier number 1. This is the first tier, but there's other tiers, so you know, there's a link in the description. Go check it out. I really appreciate it. But of course, you know, subscribe and all that good stuff. All right, let's go ahead and jump over there. And here we go. All right, so let's say, for example, C. We're doing C here, right? So you might see C major. Okay. You might just say C. Okay. I think of these, when I see these, I just think of these as a C major chord. Usually it's just like this with nothing after it. If it's a C major 7, now there's multiple ways that you might see a C major 7. You might see it like that. You might see it like with a capital M, like that. And you might see it with just a triangle after it, something like this. I like this one a lot. It's just easy to write and takes up less space. But I don't see it used a ton. But let's say, for example, for C minor, so you might see C with an M. You might see C minor, like that. A C minor 7, you might say C M7. You might see C mine 7, like this. You also, for C minor, you might just see something like this, C with a minus. And then you might see for C minor 7, you might see C minus 7, something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, like these three basically are the same thing. These are kind of the same thing, except for that one's just a C minor. And then, you know, the thing about the dominant chords is you're going to see the letter, then the numbers. So you might see C7, you might see C9, you might see C11, you might see C13. These all imply dominant chords, which is a major chord with a flatted 7th. It's a 5 chord if you know your diatonic harmony. Like I said, if you don't know a voicing for a C13, you can get away with C7. A lot of times, depending on the situation, I won't play the extensions if I'm accompanying somebody, or if I'm playing in a dense harmonic band, like maybe there's a keyboard player, another guitar player, other harmonic instruments. I might just simplify what I'm playing so I don't get too mucked up with everything. So the same thing goes for with the C minors and the C major 7s. You can add the 9 on there, you can add the 13 or whatever. But it's what's most important is to look at these little things that come right after the letter. Kind of tells you what type of chord it is. All right, so I just wanted to jump over and just kind of show you there's some variations there. Very common stuff, and I'm sure there's even more that I can't think about right now off the top of my head. But this stuff is it's good to know. It kind of gives you a little bit of backstory, especially if you're kind of a beginner / intermediate, and you know, you're just getting into chords and stuff. Or maybe, you know, like me, I learned a lot of songs when I was a kid. You know, I'm pre-internet, so I learned a lot of stuff out of just songbooks. You know, my dad was a musician, and he had a stack of songbooks at home, and Beatles songs and just whatever was popular at the time. And I used to just crack those open and learn the songs out of them. And a lot of times there'd be chords in there, And thank God they had the diagrams, because if they didn't have the diagrams, I wouldn't have known what they were. And a lot of times I didn't know what they were or what made the chord or whatever, but at least I could see where to put my fingers. And later on, I actually started learning the names for them when I learned a little bit more music theory. So, all right, cool. As far as voicings of these chords, there's a million of them, because you can flip them around, play different inversions. So I don't, I'm not going to go crazy with that. But, I think if you can differentiate between things like C add 9 or C sus 2 or C major 9 or C dominant 9, if you know what the basic chord is first, and that way if you don't have a voicing for that particular thing, you can at least cover its basic sound. And I think that's what you want to do. So, all right, just a quick one for you guys out there. Let me know if you have any questions. Make sure you subscribe and all that good stuff. Also have a Patreon channel if you want to check that out. Link is in the description. But more to come, and I'll see you next time around. Cheers.